God to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things. He is the creator, and we are the created. We are not empowered to revise him. We are created to revere him. We don't edit his instructions. We're to embrace them. And then there's life. Genesis 1:26 tells us that human beings are made in the image of God. That means every life has value. Not because of what it produces or how it looks or whether it is convenient, but because it bears the image of God. That truth is what drove Wilberforce to fight slavery. And it has led pro-life advocates to stand outside of clinics in the rain and in ridicule. And it is what should cause us to remain resolute in ending abortion, whether it is at the hands of abortionists or a government-sanctioned pill. Why? Because life is not ours to take. It is God's to give. And then there's family, marriage, and the complementarian nature of male and female. Before there was a church, before there was a nation, there was family. God didn't subcontract the formation of society to government or, thank God, academia. He started with a husband and with a wife. Genesis 2:24 says, "A man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Marriage is not a social construct. It is a sacred covenant designed to reflect something much bigger. Paul tells us in Ephesians 5 that it reflects the relationship between Christ and his church. That's why getting marriage wrong isn't just a policy problem, it's a theological problem. And let's not forget this, God made us male and female. That's not a biology idea. It's God.
You can watch this program in its entirety if you go to our website, cspan.org. We're going to leave it here and take you live now to the first meeting of the Religious Liberty Commission, established under an executive order by President Trump. Live coverage here on C-SPAN 2.
An atmosphere of civil discourse. We do ask that you refrain from flash photography, and we also ask that you refrain from both applause and any other type of interjections during the proceedings. Now, without further ado, I'll introduce our chairman, the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Good to have you here. In this historic first meeting of the Presidential Commission on Religious Liberty, the meeting comes to order, and I would ask Bishop Barron to lead us in prayer to start. Bishop. Have it out.
Testing. There we go. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, King of the universe, Lord Most High, we give you thanks and praise for all your gifts to us. On this day, as our Commission on Religious Liberty commences its work, we thank you, Lord, for our country, which is based upon the acknowledgement that our freedoms and rights come from you. We ask you to guide our efforts, to grant us the wisdom, the prudence, the courage, and the charity that we need to accomplish our goal, which is the enhancement of our first freedom, the liberty to worship you in accord with the dictates of conscience. We ask you to forgive our sins and to remove those prejudices and attachments that would prevent us from giving honor and glory to you in all things. We make all these prayers in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
To those of you watching online, welcome, and to those in the live audience, we appreciate you traveling here. A little background on how did we get here. On November 19th of last year, after the election, President Trump and I had a conversation. And in the conversation, we talked about establishing a presidential commission on religious liberty, that the time was right in this country to do so. On that first day, within a very few minutes, we said we wanted a committee of about 12 or 13. We have 13. We have a few who are traveling today. Cardinal Dolan sends his regrets. His train was canceled, so he's hoping to catch the second one out of New York. And Franklin Graham, Reverend Graham, and Eric Metaxas are in Europe. Their schedules were already committed in advance. But we have a committee, an outstanding committee, as you will meet and hear today. And then we said, who do we want on that committee? We want faith leaders. We want scholars. We want historians. We want people who have been to the Supreme Court and been involved in a number of cases on religious liberty. Once the president was sworn in and his staff was in place and the cabinet members were confirmed, we started in earnest working on this commission in March. It took several weeks to write the executive order, and on May 1st, the National Day of Prayer, we were in the Rose Garden, many of us, and the commission was officially announced with the executive order and the members of the commission. We also have advisory boards that are made up of scholars, historians, clergy that will advise us along the way, and some of those are here with us today. I want to thank Susie Wiles, the Chief of Staff to the President, who set up the Faith Office, of which Paula White, who is with us, is the Senior Advisor to the President. And I want to thank Vince Haley, the domestic, he's in charge of domestic policy, who has been instrumental in establishing this with Paula in the Faith Office. I want to thank Brittany Baldwin and Mary Margaret Bush, who created this set for us today. I want to thank the Museum of the Bible for allowing us to hold this hearing here. And we're going to have someone from the museum speak a little later in the afternoon about a fascinating story of the Bible in America. And most importantly, I want to thank the President for entrusting all of us, inviting all of us to serve, and for me to chair this great commission. Our plan is to have 7 to 9 hearings. The next hearing will be in September, and you'll get notice on that in October, November, then in February, March, and April. And our charter clearly says we have 2 roles. That is to advise and report to the President. A presidential commission does not report to Congress, but the findings from our committees will be reported to the President to see what action would happen after that. So with that, I'm honored to introduce our Vice Chair, Dr. Ben Carson, my longtime friend, and we're going to go around and have every member give opening remarks, and I'll introduce each of you after Dr. Carson. Dr. Carson.
Human beings are more than flesh and blood. We have a spiritual component that is recognized by all religions. If we had only evolved from a slime pit filled with promiscuous biochemicals, there would be no mechanism or reason for a spiritual component, and we would be like all other animals. That distinction is a privilege and has led to many different belief systems, virtually all of which influence behavioral norms. Those behavioral norms help establish a moral code, which in turn promotes civilization. Imagine trying to live in a society with no moral code. This commission promotes freedom of beliefs and that spiritual aspect of our existence that advances civilization. We will strive to facilitate the maintenance of one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. Next is Bishop Barron. He's an author, speaker, theologian. Bishop Robert Barron reaches millions of people around the world on his Word on Fire ministry. Since 2023, Bishop Barron has served as the bishop of the Diocese of Winona, Rochester, in Minnesota. Bishop.
Thanks very much, and good morning, everybody. It's a privilege to serve on this commission. As I do so, I'm standing in the tradition of Father Hesburgh of Notre Dame, who I understand was on 16 separate presidential commissions back in the 20th century. So I think it's an important role that a church person can play in this lively public conversation, and especially around this issue of religious liberty, which has been very important for the U.S. bishops for the past many decades. I've served on our committee on religious liberty for the past about 5 years. So we've taken it very seriously. My own conviction is that we've got a very special battle today. There's a texture to the way religion is being attacked in our society. It's coming from Arenian philosophy that Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, called the dictatorship of relativism. I'd call it the culture of self-invention. The complete prioritization given to individual autonomy, that we decide value, we decide meaning, we decide purpose. And I think that philosophy, which is becoming, as I say, increasingly influential in our society, rightly appreciates the classical religions as the chief opponent. Because we stand for objective moral values, we stand for God as the ground of those values, we stand for a sense of a stable human nature. And I think the rival philosophy rightly sees that as the opponent. And so I've been watching for the past many years. I was bishop out in California for 6 years. An attempt to get religion out of public life, to get religion out of healthcare, to get it out of education. So I think that's the battle that we're in. And it's a battle, now put it in very American terms, for religious liberty, our first freedom. And so both as an American and as a Catholic bishop, I'm delighted to be part of that struggle, that conversation. So that's why I'm happy to be on this commission.
Thank you, Bishop. Carrie Bowler, former Miss California USA and Miss USA first runner-up in 2009. Carrie is the author of Still Standing, Still Standing, The Untold Story of My Fight Against Gossip, Hate, and Political Attacks. Carrie.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, members of the Commission. I come before you not just to speak about a constitutional right, but about a sacred trust, religious liberty, rooted in the very soul of our nation. From the beginning, Christian faith shaped our understanding of freedom, law, and human dignity. The Declaration of Independence affirms that our rights come from our Creator, not from government, but from God Himself. George Washington, in his farewell address, spoke plainly. All of the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion, and morality are indispensable supports. He urged us not to suppose that morality could be maintained without religion. John Adams warned that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And John Jay, our first Chief Justice, reminded us, Providence has given our people the choice of their rulers, and it is the duty to prefer Christians for their rulers. These weren't abstract ideals. They were lived convictions. For nearly 200 years, school children across this country learned to read from the New England Primer, a Christian textbook, which taught them not just the alphabet, but the Word of God, moral lessons and prayers. This was not indoctrination. It was formation. It was understood that a free people must be a virtuous people, and virtue begins with truth. Since prayer and the Bible were removed from our schools, morality has dropped across America. Today, as our culture questions the very foundation we were built on, we must ask, do we want to leave our children and grandchildren a nation our founders did not create? Because protecting religious freedom isn't just about securing a right. It is about guarding the spiritual legacy that has held this country together since its birth. We have a moral and religious duty to ensure religious freedom in America. And with that duty comes hope for America, for our future, and for the enduring strength of religious liberty. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Dr. Ryan Anderson is the president of Ethics and Public Policy Center. He is also the author or co-author of 5 books, including several related to religious liberty. Dr. Anderson.
Great. Thank you. And it's a real honor and privilege to get to serve on this commission, and I'm grateful to President Trump for the appointment. I just wanted to highlight 4 things that I hope we as a commission will be able to explore during the coming year. First are the philosophical and theological roots of religious liberty. I think it's important to understand that religious liberty matters because religion matters, because we are creatures and we owe obligations to the Creator. This is how James Madison put it in his Memorial and Remonstrance, that there's a duty that we as creatures owe to the Creator, and that's what then creates the rights amongst men, which governments are then instituted to protect. Second, I think it'll be important for us to defend a robust scope of religious liberty. Too many voices recently have reduced it merely to the freedom of worship, or you see it in mainstream media referred to so-called religious liberty, or religious liberty in scare quotes. Other voices want to say religious liberty is only for people of my particular confession, whatever that confession happens to be. And then I just think the startling rise, the resurgence of anti-Semitism that we have seen, particularly on college campuses, particularly on elite college campuses. I think George Washington's letter to the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island is so important. It's no longer that toleration is spoken of, right? He's digging at John Locke right there. The Jewish people get to exercise their inherent natural rights. The U.S. government gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. So a robust scope for religious liberty. Third, that we explore the new threats to religious liberty. I think what we're seeing right now, the primary threats to religious liberty are unjust laws in the first place. And so exemptions from unjust laws won't be a sufficient remedy, but we actually need to think through what just laws would look like. And then lastly, and Carrie just touched on this, the importance of religious liberty in the public square. This isn't merely the right to worship in the privacy of your chapel or your home, but to bring your religious values into the public square for discussions of public justice and the common good. I think the attempts to create what my old boss referred to as the naked public square by some secularist voices has been a disaster. It, in essence, is denying robust religious liberty to people of faith to exercise their religious liberty in the public square. So I hope we can touch on all four of those things in the coming year. And again, it's a real honor to be able to serve the country in this way.
Thank you, Doctor. Kelly Shackelford, my longtime friend back in Texas, is President and Chief Executive Officer of First Liberty Institute. He's a constitutional scholar who has argued before the Supreme Court a number of times on religious liberty issues. Kelly?
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, by God's grace, we live in the greatest country on the face of the earth. And the reason for that is how we were created. By people fleeing other countries, coming to this country for freedom. And not just freedom, religious freedom. Quakers, Baptists, Anabaptists, Congregationalists, and so on and so on. I mean, they wanted a country where they could live with the fullest free exercise of religion possible, where the government didn't interfere between them and their relationship with God. And that makes this country really unique. It's why that we actually believe as a country that our freedoms, our rights come from God, and no government can take those away. You don't see that around the world. And sometimes people ask, they say, well, I'm not religious, so should I care about this? And the answer is absolutely. Our founders called this our first freedom because they understood if you lose this freedom, you will lose all of your freedoms. And the best way I can describe why that's true is the one thing that a totalitarian regime will never allow are citizens who hold an allegiance to one higher than the government. So whenever that type of power of coalescing comes together, the first flashpoint is always going to be religious freedom. And if you lose there, you will lose everything else. So we are really dealing with here the precipice of all of our freedoms. And so what an honor that we get to do this on behalf of the American people. And it's already been mentioned by the chair, our specific responsibility is to deliver advice and specific recommendations to the President on how to secure and advance religious freedom for all Americans. And I just think it's an honor to work together with all of you and for the American people. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Our next guest needs little introduction. Dr. Phil, best-selling author and, of course, host of a decades-running long television show, often #1 in the ratings everywhere it airs. His most recent book, We've Got Issues, How You Can Stand Strong for America's Soul and Sanity, encourages Americans to reclaim the principles of hard work, independence, and faith. Dr. Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. God save these United States and this honorable court. In God we trust on all of our currency. These are words that our founding fathers used and have for the pendency of this country. The American experiment was built on many bold ideas, none more radical than this. We have inalienable rights that come from God. Our founders foresaw that a power-hungry federal government might try to take those God-given rights from us, so they wrote protections against that into our founding documents. Chief among those were protections of religious liberty. Just for, as Kelly said, that's the underpinning to everything else. Our founders didn't view religion as a threat to liberty. They saw it as liberty's guardian. They didn't create a secular state. They created a free one where faith could flourish and shape public life. They were right to be concerned because today religious liberty is under assault. Now, I've been a mental health professional for 50 years, and it is clear to me that the family unit is the backbone of any society, none more than American society, and that liberty to freely practice a religion of choice is critical because it is the glue that can hold that family together. And I further believe that family is under attack now more than ever. We are in a cultural war, and not one among us can afford to be a non-combatant as we fight for the soul and sanity of these United States. We have to all pay attention to this, because if this one goes, if the ideologues are able to pull the rug out from under religious liberty, everything else comes tumbling down. And I am really proud that we are here and have the opportunity to talk about this and protect this liberty. And this isn't non-denominational, it's multi-denominational. It is for everybody, every belief. And I just want to thank Chairman Patrick, Vice Chairman Carson, thank you, and of course, above all, President Trump for creating this commission. I hope we all rise to the occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Phil. Pastor Paula White is the founder and president of Paula White Ministries and the National Faith Advisory Board. She is the teaching pastor at Story Life Church in Orlando, Florida. Pastor White was an advisor to President Trump in the Faith and Opportunity Initiative during his first term and now serves as the senior advisor to the White House Office of Faith, which is the first faith office ever established by any president in the history of the country, just steps away from the Oval Office. Paula?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. So good to be with everyone this morning, and I am so grateful today to be a member of this Religious Liberty Commission with such brilliant minds, with servant leadership, and with righteous hearts. It's truly an honor. And to serve as senior advisor to President Trump over the White House, I would say newly created and historic, as Chairman said, White House Faith Office, is truly a joy and a pleasure. And thanks to the leadership of President Trump, there is a White House Faith Office that is solely dedicated to people of all faith. With religious liberty as our bedrock, it is our top priority. It is what we work on the most. Jenny Korn is here in the audience, and she is our faith director, along with a part of the advisory board of this religious commission. But not only Jenny, I think right now we have 6 in the executive office of the president, and we have faith directors in every agency and every department. As Chairman said, President elevated this to the highest point. He wanted to make sure that it was not just window dressing to be in the West Wing, but that it was priority to him, and that he wanted to make it such an important part to people in America. Religious liberty is the bedrock of the founding of our country. It allows freedom to practice our faith, and every one of us have that right, as heard so many times by all of the members here, to approach God and to worship Him freely. And that's what's made our country flourish from the very beginning. President Trump has tasked the White House Faith Office with ensuring that religious liberty is protected for future generations. But we see that in recent years, some federal, some state, many people have, Kelly, my friend here, has fought so many times in the Supreme Court, and fought for people who were violated for this. Local policies have threatened America's beautiful tradition of religious liberty, and that should not be so. Houses of worship have been attacked, have been shut down, employees have been fired over their faith, religious liberties or religious entities have been debanked, parental rights have been violated. Who would have ever thought that in the very beginning, President Trump would have to pardon 23 pro-lifers for standing outside of an abortion clinic and praying silently? Or that the FBI would spy on our traditional Catholic Church? Or that a coach who would kneel on the side of a football field would have to fight all the way up to the Supreme Court to silently pray? I'm 59 years old, and that's not the America that I grew up in. We have a lot of work to do, and I believe that this task force will do it, or this commission will do it. As President Trump has said in his speeches and presidential documents, he is committed to vigorously enforce all federal laws protecting religious liberty. He'll defend that fundamental freedom with absolute devotion, and this commission will play a crucial role in helping the president fulfill these commitments. While the President and the White House Faith Office are working quickly to eradicate immediate threats to religious liberty, the Commission will focus on long-term strategies to secure religious freedom for future generations. We will gather data, conduct legal analysis, hold public hearings to capture the stories of everyday Americans related to religious liberty. And this work will ensure that the administration has the best researched, most comprehensive understanding of the current state of America's religious liberty in our nation's history. The hearings held, research conducted, and data gathered by this commission will be invaluable to President Trump, and it's so vitally important to him and to the White House Faith Office to develop and execute a long-term strategy to protect religious freedoms for all Americans of all faiths for all times. And in conclusion, we must protect and defend our freedom to practice religion with every single fiber of our being, to keep people and the country strong without fear of government discrimination. All people of faith have the right to have their voice in government. 40 years in ministry now. I've been all over the world to almost 140 countries, and my greatest fight has been for religious liberty. It's an honor, Chairman.
Thank you, Pastor. Rabbi Meir Solovacek. Rabbi?
Thank you, Chairman Patrick, for your leadership. Thank you to Vice Chair Carson and to my distinguished colleagues on this commission. I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to the President of the United States for charging us with this important task. In 1788, a parade was held in Philadelphia to celebrate Pennsylvania's ratification of the Constitution. It was attended by Benjamin Rush, founding father, famous physician, devout Christian, signer of the Declaration of Independence. Rush recorded an aspect of the procession that impressed him above all, which was the participation of the city's clergy, which included 3 individuals walking together, what Rush described as, quote, the rabbi of the Jews locked in the arms of 2 ministers of the gospel. Rush reflected that this was, quote, a most delightful sight. There could not have been a more happy emblem contrived of that section of the new Constitution, which opens its powers and offices alike, not only to every sect of Christians, but worthy men of every religion. So Rush wrote. And this event truly captured, I think, the uniquely American understanding of religious freedom, which is that it does not seek a secular civic space. It welcomes faith into society in all of its multifaceted forms, never asking of Americans that if we seek to be part of the polity, we check our observances at the door. For to do so would be to amputate the most essential part of ourselves. We bring our faith with us into society, for it is faith that fuels and inspires and guides our engagement with the civic realm. This, of course, as my friend Dr. Anderson mentioned, is the essential difference between so-called freedom of worship, which implies that religion is reserved for the sanctuary, and the genuinely American form of religious liberty that we know as free exercise. Yet over the years, this important distinction and the founders' approach to faith and freedom has been lost or ignored or elided or deliberately denied within the academy, in many state legislatures, and, for some period of time, the same could be said consequentially for the courts. Recently, the Supreme Court has paved a path to a more accurate and original understanding of the American conception of liberty, as well as the role of faith in the fabric of our society. But there remains so much work still to be done. Benjamin Rush tells us that at the parade, quote, the clergy formed a very agreeable part of the procession. They manifested, he wrote, by their attendance, their sense of the connection between religion and good government. It is rediscovering this connection that is the calling of our commission, and I feel profoundly privileged to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Allison Ho is partner of Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher. Allison Ho has established herself as one of the United States' premier appellate lawyers. She has presented over 100 oral arguments in federal and state courts nationwide, including 5 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm profoundly grateful to President Trump for establishing this important commission and deeply humbled to serve on it. The First Amendment is often called the first freedom because it's the foundation of individual liberty in our great nation. Courage is often called the first virtue because it's the one that guarantees all the rest. As an attorney, I've been blessed to advocate for everyday Americans who exemplify the first virtue, courage, by fighting for the first freedom, religious liberty, often at great cost to themselves, their families, and their livelihoods. But too often, the courage of these individuals is woefully lacking in the judges who decide their cases. Some judges hide behind procedural rules and judge-made doctrines to avoid deciding these cases at all. In one case about a veteran's memorial in the shape of a cross, a judge suggested that the defenders of the memorial should appease those it offended by, quote, chopping the arms off the memorial cross. That's not the Babylon Bee, that's an Article 3 judge. I pray this commission will serve with the courage of the everyday Americans who fight for our first freedom, of our president, who has made the first freedom a cornerstone of his administration, and of our founders, who established a priceless legacy of religious freedom. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Allison. As chair of this committee, when we were in the Rose Garden with the president, I couldn't help but think of where I grew up, 48 miles north of the Rose Garden in the inner city Baltimore, in a 12-foot wide home with marble steps. And how did I get to the Rose Garden? As a kid, I never thought I'd even meet a president or ever visit the White House. And how was I selected for this? Only in America and only through God. We have one of the most robust religious communities of faith anywhere in the world. Our religious faith in this country lifts up people. It funds hospitals, food pantries. It helps the homeless, those addicted to alcohol and drugs. A community of faith is a great thing, not a good thing. And our founders knew that. We should take stock of why did that happen in this country? Why in this country and no other place in the world? We are the leaders in our charitable giving to countries all around the world. We are the first ones there. It wasn't an accident. It was by design. Our founders based a government built on the Bible that protects the individual and their freedoms and their liberty to worship God as they choose, or not at all if they choose, but individual rights. And they wrote the First Amendment to protect our inalienable rights and of free expression. But they were wise enough not to have a government that dictated or established a religion. That was their wisdom. But rather let it be to each individual on their own conscience and their own beliefs of how they should worship and how they should pray. Then they guaranteed this magnificent inheritance of religious liberty to us all. And this commission, in part with the President's guiding, is so that we all in America can reclaim that inheritance that our founders gave us. The Declaration of Independence is consistent with the Bible, and the Bible is consistent with the Declaration of Independence, but many Americans are rightly confused. They don't know, because of decades of court cases that often were in direct opposition to what our founders believed and said, have taken away their religious liberty. Where can I pray? When can I pray? Who can I pray to? Because this commission is about all faiths. Can I wear a religious symbol to work, and will the boss tell me to take it off? And is that his right or my right? Will the HOA tell me I can't display a symbol based on my faith or my own property? The commission will answer those questions and many more questions over the next year. We want to let America know you have a great inheritance of religious liberty. And this commission over this time will free you to be free to pray where and when you want. The book of Jude is one of the smallest books in the Bible. It's only 600 words. It's next to Revelations at the end. And it's different from the other books because the other Gospels were, for the most part, for non-believers. But Jude spoke to the believers. And there's a line in there that I love. He says we must contend earnestly. In modern day parlance, that would be we must fight for our right. This commission, on behalf of the President and the people of this country, and God Almighty, will contend earnestly for religious liberty. A little bit later, we will have a guest from our Attorney General. It will be the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. We serve under the Department of Justice, so we are honored that she will join us. As you can imagine, she has a very busy schedule, and she will join us sometime a little bit later this morning or early afternoon. With that, I want to call our first two witnesses. Mark Rienzi and Professor Gerald Bradley, would you step up to the witness table? Mark Rienzi is CEO and President of Beckett, a nonprofit public interest law firm dedicated to defending the religious freedom of people of all faiths. Mr. Rienzi has successfully argued a number of First Amendment cases before the Supreme Court. He is a professor at Catholic University of America Columbus School of Law. Professor Gerald Bradley is a renowned legal scholar and professor emeritus at the University of Notre Dame Law School. As director of the Natural Law Institute and co-editor of the American Journal of Jurisprudence, Professor Bradley has published over 100 scholarly articles on constitutional law, legal ethics, and legal philosophy. The way the hearing will proceed is each witness has 10 minutes, and they have a clock in front of them, and they'll get a 2-minute warning if they need 2 more minutes. They'll both speak, and then after that, we will open up for questions from our committee members. So, Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is that on? Just stand up.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There you go.
That's on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. It is an honor to speak with you this morning about religious liberty. Our American commitment to religious liberty is essential for 4 reasons. First, religion is part of our human nature. History teaches that humans seek God. We look for something greater than ourselves. We naturally ask questions that governments can't answer and shouldn't try to answer. Second, religious liberty is woven into our founding. Many who came to these shores were religious refugees, people fleeing persecution, trying to live out their faith. Their pursuit of religious freedom helped create America. Third, religious freedom is a powerful force for peace and pluralism. A nation that respects conscience, even when we disagree, is better equipped to handle difference without division. Religious liberty thus makes us stronger and more unified. Fourth, religious liberty is both the basis and the bellwether for all other human rights. It is often the first right to be attacked, and when it falls, others inevitably follow. But the opposite is also true and cause for great hope, and that is that where religious liberty is protected, other rights flourish. Religious liberty is thus foundational. It protects the broader architecture of liberty and human dignity for everyone, religious or not. And that is precisely why this Commission's work matters so much. You all have the rare opportunity to stand for a right that transcends political divides, that benefits everyone, and that reflects the very best of the American experiment. At the founding, just like today, this was a nation of people with deeply held and deeply divergent opinions. In Europe, people were killing each other over these disagreements, using the power of government to crush disfavored ideas and disfavored people. But the genius of the American approach is that we took those disagreements and we harnessed them to create a system of freedom and pluralism by which we all benefit. Religious liberty is the centerpiece of that system. Most people throughout history have lived under regimes that stifle differing opinions on big questions like religion. But that is not the American way. Our founders recognized that we have rights not as a gift from government, but from the God who created us in his own image. And at the top of that list, with only rare limitations, is the freedom to live out one's faith. That commitment to human rights and religious liberty makes the United States a beacon of hope and freedom for the entire world. Of course, our pursuit of those ideals has been imperfect. At various times, we have discriminated against virtually every group of religious people. It is crucial that we learn from those mistakes. Two contrasting Supreme Court cases help illustrate how important it is to get religious liberty right, and how dangerous it is to get it wrong. The first is one they don't teach much in law schools these days anymore, but they should. Minersville School District versus Gobaitis. The case illustrates what I would call the government control approach to religious liberty. The Gobaitis case actually has its roots in Nazi Germany. As Hitler's Nazi party was gaining power, they crashed into a small religious group that had come from America, called the Jehovah's Witnesses. In Germany, the witnesses refused to do the Heil Hitler salute to the Nazi flag. They thought it was the equivalent of worshiping a false idol. Not surprisingly, the Nazi government was not pleased. They threw many witnesses into concentration camps. They took their children away, sent them off to German schools to make them good nationalist Germans. The Nazis had government control, they knew how to use it, and they did not brook dissent. Back here in America, the Jehovah's Witnesses heard about all this, and though they didn't think our government was anything like the Nazis, they eventually decided that they shouldn't salute the flag either. And when two young school children, Lillian and Billy Gobaitis, told their teacher that they couldn't salute the flag because of their religion, the Supreme Court got its first flag salute case. Sadly and wrongly, the court said that the government gets to control, even in matters of conscience. The court said that religious liberty was important, but then it said that legislatures and even school boards get to choose and have the power to decide when to coerce violations of faith. The court's ruling set off a wave of violence against Jehovah's Witnesses. They were physically beaten. They were dragged out of their houses, dragged into the streets and forced to salute the flag. Their houses of worship were burned to the ground. They were shot at. One sheriff explained why he wouldn't intervene to help them. Quote, "They're traitors. The Supreme Court says so." Thankfully, just 3 years later, the Supreme Court reversed itself in West Virginia versus Barnett. While Gobaitis had embraced government control over everything, including your relationship with God, Barnett rejects that stingy view of liberty. Here's the famous quote: If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. In short, the court said that some things are beyond the reach of politics and government. The Bill of Rights must be respected and protected at every level of government and for every person. As you all frame the work you will do on this commission, I urge you to embrace the principled Barnett approach to liberty. That is not always easy. Governments often think some other value ought to rank higher than respecting religious freedom, especially for someone with unpopular religious beliefs. Please do not accept the sacrifice of religious liberty for political convenience. Don't accept the government control approach of go bite us. That is a cheap counterfeit of liberty, and you all were not called to this commission to serve a cheap counterfeit of liberty. America's overall story of religious liberty is quite positive. But since you asked for recommendations, let me give you 3 recent examples of places where our society has fallen short. After the October 7th terrorist attacks in Israel, many American college campuses succumbed to horrific anti-Semitism. Jewish students were harassed, swastikas became common. At UCLA, there was a Jew exclusion zone in the heart of the campus. Shockingly, UCLA used its police force to turn Jewish students away rather than helping them through. In another case, courts recently turned their backs on the Western Apache people, refusing to protect a sacred site where they have practiced their faith for generations. Now that holy ground is in danger of being destroyed so that a foreign-owned company can extract copper from it. And you are likely familiar with the plight of the Little Sisters of the Poor, Catholic sisters who provide loving homes for the elderly. State and federal governments have been trying for more than a decade to force the sisters to help distribute contraceptives and abortion-inducing drugs. Even after 3 wins at the Supreme Court, the Little Sisters are still fighting hostile state governments in court today. The greatest and freest nation on the face of the earth can do better than fostering anti-Semitism, destroying sacred sites, or pretending we need to force nuns to give out birth control. Governments and bureaucrats will always come up with some reason they don't need to respect religion. This commission should make clear that conscience is sacred, and you should call our great and diverse nation to work with our religious differences rather than stamping them out. Remember the example of George Washington. Even when our nation's very existence stood in the balance, he respected the religious conscience of Quakers who could not bear arms. This commission should call us all to live up to that legacy. Let me make one closing point about why protecting religious liberty is so important. The entire edifice of rights in America is based on the understanding that God created humans free and equal, and that our God-endowed inalienable rights come from that intrinsic human dignity which every person shares. We see this argument in foundational American documents like the Declaration of Independence. It was also the basis for the Quakers' early petitions against slavery, petitions they were only around to make because of our early commitment to religious liberty. The late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of the UK put it this way when receiving the Canterbury Medal for Religious Freedom, quote, "In America, the tree of liberty has religious roots. Don't think you can sever those roots and have the tree of liberty survive." Religion and religious liberty give us a foundational commitment of equal respect and human dignity for everyone, including the people with whom we disagree. If religion and religious liberty are wiped away, there is no reason to expect that people will operate from that same foundation of equal respect for the human dignity of all, especially when we disagree. We don't want to live in that nasty world, and we don't want to leave it to our children and grandchildren either. The The great American commitment to liberty means there are places in our lives where the government is not allowed to go. There are rights that the government is not allowed to take away. No other country in human history has protected human rights the way America has. And no other right is more essential to the perpetuation of that system than religious freedom for all. That is the legacy of liberty to which all Americans are heirs. That is the legacy of liberty that all human beings deserve. May God bless the work of this commission to advance and strengthen that legacy for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We will hold questions until our second witness, Gerald Bradley. Gerald?
Thank you, Governor Patrick and members of the Commission. America's founders were pioneers of religious liberty. Unlike practically all societies before theirs, they rejected top-down control of the people's religion through princely imposition or by the union of altar and throne or by enforcement of some eclectic civil religion, or by all three, as in England, circa 1776. But the idea here in these societies was political prosperity through religious unity. Now, unlike most free societies after theirs, our founders did not secure religious liberty by erecting what Ryan Anderson's old boss, Richard Newhouse, dubbed the naked public square, a secularized space from which religion is banished. The idea here is political prosperity without religion. This idea was the Supreme Court's mid-20th century point of departure, starting in earnest with the school prayer case in 1962. The founders rejected these false alternatives. For them, it was not either public religion without freedom or freedom without public religion. The founders went all in on both and. They steadily maintained, in the words of the first Congress, which wrote the religion clauses into the Bill of Rights, that religion was necessary to both the happiness of mankind and to good government. America's founders launched an epochal, novel experiment in human rights and civil liberty, an experiment which by world historical standards has been a singular success. Now, what emboldened our founders to blaze the path of religious freedom? They were political savants, to be sure, but they knew their history, too. They knew that the politically savvy move was to control religion from the top down. So again, where did their extraordinary political courage come from? Well, their trust in divine providence is surely one reason. But providence is fully compatible with human persons' free cooperation in God's plan. Indeed, providence presupposes that freedom. God helps those who help themselves. The founders chose freely and without precedent the epochal, uncharted path of freedom, with eyes wide open. But why did they do that? Because they were convinced that government's obligation to preserve and protect religious liberty is a true principle of justice and political morality. Freedom of religion for all is the only valid conclusion they could draw from a series of truths they held most firmly, though I think not, as a matter of fact, self-evidently, but call the nest of these truths, these propositions, the moral foundations of religious liberty. Now, where shall we look for a compact expression of them, those moral foundations? Well, we could look to the founding generation's preeminent guide to constitutional meaning, to the guiding force behind our First Amendment, and to the author of what the Supreme Court, or what Supreme Court justices, liberal and conservative, have all treated as the Magna Carta of American religious liberty. I speak not of three men here, but of one, James Madison. and I speak of his 1785 pamphlet against the Virginia tax for the support of ministers, the pamphlet called The Memorial and Remonstrance. And indeed, I'll just talk about the very first paragraph of it. Madison wrote that religious liberty is not about the sovereignty of the human person, what we might call subjective right. Much less was religious liberty about that idiosyncratic creativity expressed by the Supreme Court in 1992 in its infamous or famous mystery passage. For Madison and the founders, there was a sovereign in the picture, an omniscient and good one. Madison wrote, "Before any man can be considered a member of civil society, he must be considered as a subject of the governor of the universe." Now, this subject was not for Madison or the other founders a law unto himself. Religious liberty as an inalienable right, or was an inalienable right according to Madison, because, Madison wrote, what is here a right towards men is a duty towards the Creator. This obligation is not like other important moral duties which one fulfills by inaction. Thou shalt not. This duty to the Creator is a much heavier lift, and it's inalienable for a second reason, Madison wrote, because the opinions of men, depending only on the evidence contemplated by their own minds, cannot follow the dictates of other men. This freedom of conscience, conscientious belief, is not a license for indifferentism. It is an overriding call, moral call, to knuckle down and get serious, to do some very hard thinking about divine realities. Now, central to religion is one conscientiously judging what is the case about ultimate matters, and then acting according to what one judges to be the case. Now, this obviously can only happen if people are free of coercion and manipulation. Madison wrote, "It's the duty of every man to render to the Creator such homage, and such only as he believes to be acceptable to him. This is a duty that can only be fulfilled by free thought, judgment, decision, and subsequent action of each person. No one can perform it for you. If you don't do it, it don't get done." Now, note well, these moral foundations were not held by the founders as truths of religion. That was about what the denominations and the sects taught, revealed doctrines, the deliverances of prophets and sacred texts, ceremonies and charisms, and church precepts. The moral foundations of religious liberty, as we find them in Madison and across the founding, comprises truths about religion, about divine realities, human intelligence and free choice, and the political common good. These the founders thought to be truths to be accessible to unaided human reason. They're really more truths of political theory or actually of philosophy, not religion. So for that reason, there can be no sound argument, none that I can think of, that recovering these moral foundations of religious liberty, these truths about divine realities, human life, and the political common good, amount themselves to some sort of religious establishment. And we certainly should not suppose that Madison, for example, was foolish enough to argue for religious liberty in a memorial remonstrance on grounds that we would call or would sound to people like a religious establishment. Now, the founders resolved to let the spirit of human inquiry and judgment blow where it wills, in the end because they were obliged to do that. Obliged not by superior force, or even, so far considered, by any revealed or revelatory act of God within human history. The founders were obliged by reason and conviction. They were compelled by truth. Now, the founders recognized two entailments, I'll call them, of what they wrought, their settlement, their experiment in religious liberty. One thing they recognize is this: unleashing the potentially disruptive forces of felt spiritual imperatives is risky. It is. So risky that no polity before theirs ever did it. Second, the founders recognized that in a free society like ours, the restraint, the virtue really necessary to good order, has to come from the character of the people, not from government dictates. At the intersection of these two lines of thought, these two entailments, stood religion. The founding generation all but universally held that the political commonweal, the common good, depended upon the piety of the people. This is the message not only of Washington's justly famous farewell, the message of John Adams, it's the message also of Thomas Jefferson and pretty much everybody else at the founding. This pervasive judgment that religion supplies the ground for virtue, and virtue is necessary for freedom. This pervasive judgment, I would say, is not quite a moral foundation of religious liberty. I rather think of it as a morally adjacent truth of political wisdom. But there it is, nonetheless. Now, someone might now reheat an anti-establishment objection and serve it up right here against what I've been saying. Someone might say these affirmations about divine realities, etc., lack, if they're a basis for government action, lack a secular purpose, which is required for every government action. Now, this was indeed a demand, for an unfortunate season, of the Supreme Court's late, and I dare say unlamented, Establishment Clause test, the infamous three-part Lemon test, which was a gigantic mistake, which Justice Scalia 30 years ago likened, in his usual colorful language, Scalia speaking, the Lemon test is like a ghoul in a late-night horror movie that repeatedly sits up in its grave and shuffles abroad after being repeatedly killed and buried. Well, to continue with the colorful prose, finally the Lemon test has a stake buried through its heart, and it's really, really dead now. Now, the secular purpose objection, the secular purpose part of the Lemon test for that matter, I think is, in any event, question-begging wordplay. The wordplay goes like this. You see, religious and secular are opposites. So if government should act for the sake of religion, they must not be acting for a secular purpose, even if acting for religion opens onto or produces what we might call secular prosperity in a wide sense. Well, we don't need to think that way, and the founders most certainly didn't think that way. Let's instead work with the founders' words and concepts and think about government promoting religion for the sake of the common good. Now, the founders were keenly, even fearfully aware of the divide between this passing veil of tears and what they ubiquitously referred to as, the founders' terms, a future state of rewards and punishments. But the founders never used the term secular when they talked about religion and the polity. The closest they came to doing so was probably references to what they called worldly activities, which were mostly forbidden, on the Sabbath. For the founders, proper government care for the temporal common good included encouragement and help and recognition of religion, albeit always respectful of persons' freedom and churches' autonomy. In the founders' world, deploying the word secular would have added nothing to the discussion and probably confused everybody party to it. Now, in conclusion, I've spoken so far. I haven't really spoken specifically about constitutional interpretation of the religion clauses. And I should like to close by noting two takeaways from my remarks pertinent to constitutional interpretation. One is this. It's folly to think we can jettison what I've called the moral foundations of religious liberty and its moral adjacent, the people's virtue. I think it's folly to think we can jettison that is banish it from our thinking, and remain faithful to anything like the original understanding of the religion clauses. The other takeaway is that no matter what is true with other constitutional provisions, here at the keystone of our constitutional civil liberties, here with religious liberty, there is no need for the contemporary interpreter on or off a court, interpreter of the constitutional language, to choose between history and justice, to choose between historical recovery of the plain meaning of the text and what surely appears to be the moral truth of the matter. For in the case of the religion clauses, the founders wove truth into the text in a tapestry for the ages.
Thank you. Kelly?
I guess I have a question for each. First, Mark, first, thank you for literally a life of service for religious freedom and what you've done. I really do. I'm thankful for both of you. Mark, I want to start with you. I know Ms. Ho mentioned in her opening remarks this issue, and since you litigate in this area, of judges trying to avoid and creating things so that they don't rule for people in these cases. I'd just like you to give your experience on that, whether you think that's true, and then if there's any recommendation or anything you have that we could recommend to the president. I don't know if there is, but I think there could be. And then Professor Bradley, I know this afternoon we're going to get to more cases and all this, but you've had such a wide background on this. I would love to get your idea. You mentioned the Lemon case being overturned and our Kennedy case that we did a few years ago, but what do you think is the next big thing that should go if we're going to have more religious freedom? And then if you have any ideas how to move us in that way, I'd love that as well.
Sure. Thanks, Kelly. Happy to discuss it. There's something that I think is true of judges, but I think it's also true of people who work in all levels of state and federal government, which is sometimes you get up or sometimes you encounter a situation and you're just not all that eager to do the job. And I think one thing this commission can and should do is call on all of our public servants of judges, but I think it's also true of people who work in all levels of state and federal government, which is sometimes you get up or sometimes you encounter a situation and you're just not all that eager to do the job. And I think one thing this commission can and should do is call on all of our public servants